Hello, and welcome to the EDM Council and BigID webinar titled Behind Closed Doors, Silicon Valley Bank's Sensitive Data Management Strategies. Mike Meriton, co-founder and COO of the EDM Council, will be kicking off this presentation. Over to you, Mike.
Great, thank you, Yolan, and welcome everybody to today's EDM webinar. So why are we here? Sensitive data management is a cross-functional priority that impacts security, privacy, and data initiatives. And data management teams need to scale work by replacing manual processes with an automated approach for sensitive data management. And frankly, one of the biggest challenges is discovering and cataloging and classifying data for the appropriate policy management. So with no further ado, let me introduce our speakers that will be addressing this important topic today. And we'll go to the next slide, which is first, I'd like to welcome Peggy Tsai, who is the CDO for BigID. A little bit about Peggy herself. She has 18 years of experience in data management and stewardship and has worked at some distinguished firms, notably S&P Global, AIG, and Morgan Stanley. Also is an adjunct faculty at Carnegie Mellon's CDATA-O program, and she is an active member with the EDM Council Women Data Professionals Forum and the Global Co-Lead for Events. And Peggy, you've also been active. I've been seeing you in the CDMC working group member meetings, so we're great to have you here and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mike.
Good to see you. And let me go ahead and introduce our other speaker, Jennifer Mezzio, who is the Managing Director of HR and Divisional Data Officer for Silicon Valley Bank, a very active member with the EDM Council as well. So a little bit about Jennifer. She has 25 years in IT strategy, business systems, data analysis, data warehousing, and data governance. Some of the current projects that Jennifer is involved in include building and executing and transforming HR into a data-driven organization, which is awesome to hear, by the way, Jennifer. And your scope now includes legal and cybersecurity. You have a master's in organizational leadership and computer science from Quinnipiac University. And congrats, you're on the editorial board for the CDO magazine, our EDM Council partner organization as well. So Jennifer, two things. First, welcome. Thank you for speaking with us today. And frankly, also thank you for opening up the doors to this discussion that's born out of your experiences at Silicon Valley Bank. So welcome, good to have you here.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me.
Good, so to set some context, Peggy, I'm gonna turn the forum over to you to just brief our audience on what we're gonna be talking about today.
Sure, thank you, Mike. And thank you, Jennifer, for being here with me today on today's webinar. So I'm really excited to be talking about data, right? So we all know that today's organizations, modern businesses drive on the creation and the accumulation of data, and the fact that a lot of the data that is organized or utilized within an organization is not known. So I really love to use this iceberg analogy, where really the tip of the iceberg is the data that we do know. It's structured, it's documented, it's governed. And what is really beneath the iceberg is the data that is really in unstructured environments, that's really not going through a formal governance process. And this data is growing at exponential rates, right? We're talking about customer data, product data. In particular, today, we'll be talking about employee data, right? From an HR perspective, employee data can include, your spousal data, your dependent data, and that really can grow at really high rates. So really being able to think about this type of data, how do we protect it? How do we secure it? How do we protect it from data breaches and leaks? And really thinking about the requirements that your organization needs to have in order to protect this data. Because at the end of the day, you can't protect the data that you don't know. And secondly, a big trend that we've been seeing for sure from amongst many of the data teams and the CDMC group that I've been talking to, certainly the adoption of cloud is accelerating. So the cloud data, whether organizations are storing their cloud on-prem or multi-cloud environments, the risk of that cloud data grows as well. So on top of the challenge of finding your data in your known data lakes and data environment, being able to map the data and align the data to the right frameworks and the right regulatory environments, we're really addressing additional risk that is now data that's on the cloud. So data that's stored in more places, the velocity and speed of that data, really the variety of the data that's being created and stored, and having that automation and that handle on the data is really key, because it's about the holistic view of being able to understand it and not have data stored in siloed systems, and not having a tech stack that can be compatible to really understanding and governing and protecting your data. So with that said, I want to pass it over to Jennifer at Silicon Valley Bank and really talk about these challenges in a real world example.
Thanks, Peggy. Well, first and foremost, let me introduce Silicon Valley Bank. To put it simply in my words, I think Silicon Valley Bank is the cool bank. We're the bank of innovation. We're their innovation economy's financial partner. There's some stats on the side, little facts at a glance, but a lot of our clients, a lot of you probably already know, like Teladoc, ZipRecruiter, Tableau, and most important, wineries. So we have a broad scope from private banking through all the way, like I said, to wineries, to startups, entrepreneur. I mean, we're pretty much just the bank of the innovation economy, and it's really a great company to work for. It's very exciting, always changing. So we can go to the, thank you. So not to date myself here, but how many people, and you can raise your hand at home or at work or wherever you are, remember getting nasty grams from IT asking us to remove files from the shared drives because we ran out of space?
Yes.
We went from scrambling, right, to get space to hoarding data. And somewhere along the way, data got much cheaper. We started just collecting more and more and more. We needed it for more and more processes. And now, companies are at the point where, how do we, retain what we need to retain for our business processes, but then purge what we don't need anymore to do the right thing by our customer, our employee. Another one of our problem statements in HR is that we have data in various systems across this bank. So when I look at our footprint, while the IT and data vertical reside within the HR organization, we so far have cataloged that we go to at least 260 touch points across this bank. And that's not including external third-party vendors. So our footprint for employee data is very large across the bank, and it's used for several processes. So when we talk about retaining and purging, we really have to ensure that we're doing our due diligence to understand where that data is, because I think you said it perfectly. You said you can't protect the data that you don't know, Peggy, right? And so we really need to understand where is that data so that we can do the proper due diligence by that data. It's not always easy to identify the data that's outside of the retention policies. So in HR, we have a lot of different retention policies. Our medical information can be 5 years. Termed employees 7.5, 401k we get to keep for a lifetime. And so, we just have a different scenario grouping across what I would consider the individual record, right? And when I say individual employee record, I'm thinking from A to A. So it's applicant to alumni, in my opinion, is that employee journey. And like you said earlier, within that journey are a lot of different things. There, your spouse is getting benefits, your dependents are coming in, beneficiaries, anything like that, your ratings, your reviews, all of that, in my opinion, is employee information, and it's all categorized differently according to the retention policy. Currently, our purging is highly manual. So, we're able to go in and identify things to a point. We're still working on that. But once we have that, what do we do with it? The team has gone through, and I have to give a shout out to my team at Silicon Valley Bank and HR, because they're absolutely fantastic and they're very meticulous. And I appreciate that from them. In a data role, I feel you have to be, and they go in and we do our best. We do our best to ensure that we're analyzing, and overanalyzing before we say we're going to purge this. Because again, we have so many different scenarios that come up and something may impact that. And then again, the purging for that one record could go across all these 260 plus touch points. And so it brings me to my visual on the left as I was thinking about companies and solving this problem. And I come to the realization that the reason why companies can't solve this problem is because I'm not really sure if it could be solved 100%. So when we look at the game on the left, when we're doing purging and retention, it reminds everyone that, again, I'm aging myself with these visuals as well, but if anyone remembers this game, you have to take the two sides and you have to balance it so that you don't fall through. And to me, one side is retain, one side is purge. And in the middle, as our new laws come in, as we're finding out new reasons why we need to keep this data, we're trying to find that balance. I mean, so many times my team has gone down the road and been like, yep, we're ready to purge this. And then we find out something new and we have to hold on to it. And I think companies are truly trying to do their due diligence to, purge the information they've collected and at the same time ensure that they're not, purging it and need it for anything, say like a payout, deferred payout, or, God forbid it's an illegal hold or something to that, respect. So again, it's that balance, and companies are going to have to continue to do that balance. And at some point, maybe take a little bit of a risk to say, we've analyzed it, we've done our best, and now we need to move forward.
Great. So by the way, Jennifer, when you said raise your hand if you have received an email saying you've used up your space, I thought you were asking, do you recognize that game? Because as a kid, I remember playing with that game, and I got a few decades or more behind me. So, and it's actually a hard game to get to the end. It takes a lot of practice to do it. So, your point that navigating that, like it is navigating these issues, is you got to balance stuff and manage budgets and manage expectations. So let's get on to the polling question. This is to get our audience on their keyboard and participating. So here's the question. Again, this is anonymous. Pick the question or answer. There's only one choice you can make, which is, what is your organization's biggest challenge with sensitive data management? Just pick one, and we'll announce the results in a moment. I'm watching the real time. It's like real-time voting coming in. It's sort of cool. And I'll ask Peggy and Jennifer to respond on whether or not the responses of our audience are a surprise or not. I'll give it a few more moments. We're having a good amount of participation. Again, you can only pick one. There's no right or wrong, so please don't take this as a pressure test. It's just to find out what you think is your biggest challenge going on for your organization. Okay, I think the results are in. Let me just announce those. I'll let our team pop that up. And so number one at 50%, is that manual and tedious processes to identify data, to be in compliance. And then number two, what's number two? Is at 19% lack of prioritization across teams to manage sensitive data. So Peggy, is that a surprise or what you were figuring you would see? And Jennifer, in a moment, please welcome your thoughts on it before we keep rolling here. And thank you to our audience for answering. So Peggy, what do you think?
Wow, these are surprising, and also yet I'm a little shocked by some of these answers. I mean, certainly number one, but the fact that overwhelmingly 50% the manual and tedious process. I think Jennifer alluded to the fact that she has over 260 touch points. I mean, that's an amazing number of being able to juggle all that and make sure the retention and purging rules apply. So certainly I see that as a very common one. But actually number two and actually number three, the difficulty to identify the data for the retention policy, something that I think Jennifer is going to talk about as well, because that is a challenge amongst many organizations. So certainly not surprised with number one, but number two and three are things that we can talk about more further today in the webinar.
Jennifer, any comments on your side, just seeing the honesty of our audience across these spectrum of challenges?
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the honesty, and being in the trenches, it doesn't surprise me at all. It is very manual and tedious, and I think that's why a lot of companies have been shying away from it. But we need to roll up our sleeves and we need to get in there. And even with automated tools and bringing that in, it's still going to be manual until we get operationalized.
Yeah, and I was going to say, it's certainly to me, which is I think part of what we're going to be talking about, it does make a case that automation could really bring an ROI possibly to this activity and help make it more feasible. So, but I'll let you all continue that discussion. By the way, for our audience, please type your questions in. Use the Q. There's a little Q&A box. Use that for the questions if possible instead of the chat, but we'll try to pick up both sides. The other thing I just want to let our audience know is that every question that is typed in, we're going to do our best to answer. If not, we're going to, after the event's over, we're going to send out everyone a written response for every question that's logged in. So type them in as you have them. We'll get to as many as possible during the Q&A section of this event. We're really grateful to make this interactive. So Peggy, back to you.
Actually, it's back to Jen.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Jennifer, I interrupted your flow, off and running.
That's okay. I can hop right back in. So as you see on the left, everyone could probably chuckling on that. It is very true. I mean, our data footprint has just, if you've been in, doing this as long as some of us, on the phone have, I mean, you've just seen that data footprint explode, especially with the ease of getting storage. So as we've said many times back and forth, it is just highly manual due to the complexity of scenarios. And I saw somebody in the chat say something about being able to program the technical specifications. I agree with that. What I would love to see, when I think of the perfect solution, in my head, if anyone's had the joy of ever combing through a COBOL spaghetti code, in my head, I think of this as if then else statements, right? If this person is here 7.5 years and they don't have anything, purge, else, hold it until, we're done paying our deferred comp, something like that. To me, that represents automation. But again, we have to program those rules in. We have to run it a few times. We have to ensure the accuracy, and then we're going to get comfortable with the operationalizing it, and that is going to take time. Employee data is more than just the worker record from A to A, from applicant to alumni, right? It's the spouses, dependents, it's our investigations, training, workforce planning, surveys, everything that we want to know about our employee, even how they work, the way in which we work, what tools we're using to collaborate. So much goes into that data that we have within our vertical in HR, and being able to have that data and use it for accuracy is fantastic. But again, you just start collecting more and more and more. The risk and exposure of sensitive data is reduced by having our IT and data verticals in HR. I'm very lucky there. I have a great partner from the HRIS vertical, and we partner very well in ensuring that we collaborate to create that governance. But what about outside HR? I know that plenty of people across this bank, and we have those 260 touch points, yes, but those 260 touch points outside of HR don't have a lot of that sensitive data. That sensitive data still sits within HR. And so how am I helping people outside of HR make better decisions with that data if they need the sensitive data, and how am I governing it? And then how am I purging it once I give it to them? And then we also in HR, one of our biggest problem statements, and this may be, in a lot of places, is that we just grow so quickly. SVB has gone, when I started, I've been there 6 years, and we've tripled in our employee base. So from like 3,500 employees, I think to like, almost 9,000, 9,500 now. And that's not even with our contractor base. And so that's a large amount in a short period of time. Again, it's the bank of innovation. So as the innovation economy grows, we grow. And so, now again, there goes that bigger footprint. And if we don't have the lineage document, and we don't have an understanding of where our data sits and where it rests, we are truly at a disadvantage. So what is my wish list? Well, you heard earlier that my wish list was a little bit to have that functionality of, the business rules, right? The technical functionality, my if then else statements. But what else comes with that? So I really would like a robust inventory of our data elements, which includes the classification, old school, in my head, I always think the source to target mappings, which truth be told, in my entire career was probably and I still love it. It's my favorite thing to do. I have a very good curiosity of source to target and the transformations that happen in between. So in my head, when I think of data, I always think in those lines, right? Right now we have that inventory, but it's being manually updated. So we've created a data dictionary different to what our enterprise uses. They use Calibra right now, and we're exploring that. But in HR, we needed to use something fairly quickly as we moved into our integration. If anyone heard, we had an integration, an M&A last 2 years ago. I'm going to say 2021, a year and a half ago. And we need to make that data dictionary pretty quickly so that we understand everywhere our data elements went. Well, now it has to be manually updated. And in the speed in which we're growing, that's just not feasible. We want to be able to tag and catalog the data elements that we put in that data dictionary across all of our different touch points. And again, if you hear 260 plus, that's a lot of touch points. And so how are we doing that, and how is that going to happen? We want to be able to easily identify those data elements. So, okay, we've tagged them, that's great. You know, how do we identify them? How do we put a purge / or retention against them to say, this is part of a record that is supposed to be held for 7.5 years. We have to hold this for 7.5 years. I would love to create an automated retention and purge process, not only for HR, but operationalized across SVB. Again, it may not be 100% in the beginning. That's, you know, to be expected. Systems do not make up data. They do not make up business roles. Human beings have to program them in. And so we have to take the due diligence to understand where our data is. We have to do the due diligence to start to clean that up. We have to program based on our retention schedule and the business rules in which we want to retain the data, and then roll it out in a few cycles, parallel to the manual process, to then operationalize it and purge it when we get to that comfort level. And as new laws come in, again, there's that labyrinth game again. Those new laws are going to come in, you know, and we see this across the United States, where we have, you know, 5 states now that have what they say consumer laws, but those consumer laws do pertain to employees as well. And now new laws coming in, more data getting collected over time. We're going to be continuously balancing that labyrinth. And then we're going to align retention and purge policies across the entire enterprise, so that SVB has one look and feel as when it comes to how we handle unstructured and structured data.
So Jennifer, we've had some really interesting questions start coming in. And again, for our audience, if you have any thoughts on this topic, fire away. We're here to answer questions. But let me frame a couple before we move on to a polling question in a moment. This came in from one of our audience members, Shama, which is, for sensitive data, it's combinations of data that make it sensitive. And should the focus be on identifying underlying individual components and systems, or the combinations? I think a very interesting point that Shama's making is that data assembled together or connected together can create broader confidentiality issues. So where do you start? And then there's a question almost immediately after that, Jennifer and Peggy, that's I feel is related, which is, at what level of granularity do you classify your sensitive data? So Jennifer, any thoughts on that? And then certainly welcome Peggy to weigh in on this one.
Yeah, that's an absolutely great question. When we look at data elements, you know, is it personally identifiable, or is it right, PII when you bring it all together? And so as part of our governance, the team, the HR data team, has pushed back on individuals and had to educate individuals that, yes, you might be asking for a piece of this information, right? But if it has employee ID, do you really need employee ID on it? Because if you and maybe 5 of your friends get together, just exaggerating, and, you know, bring these pieces together, we now have something that can be considered PII. And so we obviously trust our employees, but, you know, I think we could all agree one of our biggest risks across data is human beings at this point. Yep. And so we want to make sure that we are being fair to them and not putting them at a risk, you know, for any kind of data exposure, and that we're also protecting from a governance perspective. So in my opinion, it's almost, when you're in data, you have to go down to the nth degree, and that is the data element, and that's the way in which I would approach that. But Peggy, I'm interested in how you would handle it.
No, I agree that sort of the best practices I share is at the element level, you put a certain risk rating identification to it, but also the aggregation. So we do know that combinations of data increases the risk level and sensitivity level.
Right.
So you do have to look at it from both perspectives. Different combinations will, be able to identify and reveal certain identities and entities much more clearly than other combinations. So we do believe that when you look at data, you have to think about it from the combination and also from the basic building blocks point of view, and have risk ratings on both levels.
So Jennifer, I have to pop one more question, and I know we're using a little bit of the Q&A time or this discussion, but I think it's really relevant because, and this comes from Devamani, there we go, which is my question to Jen and Peggy. Is based on these outcomes, I approach this aspect through an ROI-based driven outcomes, so I get buy-in for iterative cleanup of data. It's a really interesting thought, which is to get anything to happen in most companies, if there's not an ROI, it's hard to get attention from top management to spend money on it. Jennifer, you've been working on these intended outcomes. Is ROI the key to presenting this, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The way I present it is that, no, we can't always have an ROI, right? I think, the cleanup, how can you quantify cleanup? But without a solid foundation, you really can't build a house. So in order for us to be able to, let's say, scale to the nth degree, or bring in this project, or, if SVB wants to do another M&A, what do we do to set ourselves up for success? And that is cleaning up what we have now. That is ensuring that our house is in as much in good enough shape as we can have it, so that we can then begin to build for the future. Without that, it's just, I don't know how companies can begin to scale. And when I do present it in that way, I do get the nods of the head and people do understand, but, it's definitely, to put it bluntly, it's not the sexy work, in all honesty, to clean up. It's not fun. But when it is done, it is really appreciated.
Yeah, and it gives you more confidence on what use cases are achievable and allowable. Peggy, any thoughts on the comment from Devamani about the idea of ROI around these topics? I mean, intuitively, it seems to me some things are just compliance and mandatory and regulatory required. So there's the risk of fines and other issues. But what do you think, Peggy?
No, absolutely. So I hear that question often in terms of the ROI for specifically purging and deleting data. Yep. But the title of this webinar is really about sensitive data management, and it applies to multiple use cases around privacy and security. So if it's not particular ROI here, but the fact that you're able to add additional business use cases and benefits across your entire organization, the fact that you are, eliminating duplications and you are maintaining your data policies, certainly from a privacy compliance point of view, but from a technology point of view, you're not storing excess data, you're de-risking your security access. There are many benefits and certainly additional use cases that can be added in order to increase the calculation if you're calculating the ROI.
Wonderful. I think, Peggy and Jennifer, we have another polling question. And by the way, the audience is warming up. We're getting more questions coming in, which is awesome. And we'll get on to answering as many as possible. So here's the next polling question. What is your organization's technology readiness level to help manage sensitive data? Again, this is a single choice. There's no right answer. Do your best to, again, and it's also anonymous. So, just put in what you think is the situation. And it'll just give us a sense of where our audience across the 100+ live participants, where everyone is at on this topic. We'll give it a moment or two. I get to see it sort of dynamically show up, but we'll give enough time for people to respond. And I think what we have here is the classic innovators curve. You started, we're really ahead of the game and leading the charge on this. And at the bottom of the list is we haven't started any of this at all. So we'll wait a moment. Okay, I think we're almost there. Yeah, we're getting up to the same kind of numbers we had before. And thank you to our audience for weighing in. If you have access to the polling questions, that'd be great. Okay, I guess we'll have our team from the council display the results. And here's where we are. This looks like a bell curve, Peggy and Jennifer, where number one is early maturity, which is, we've started to explore solutions and we'll do so within the next 12 months. That's interesting. And I think number two in percentage is early adopters. Some companies are already implementing their solutions, but they're in the early stage of doing that with an eye for applying it to the rest of their enterprise. So Jennifer and Peg, any thoughts on what the audience is weighing in on? Go for it.
Not too surprising in terms of these numbers. Certainly, a lot of the privacy protection laws around sensitive data management it's been around for a couple of years, but the enforcement is really coming to play this year. So it's great to see that half the audience is early maturity or have been early adopters. So it's good to see, and hopefully the next 6 months or so those numbers will shift even more.
Cool. Good. I guess back over to you all to carry forward, and we'll be going to full Q&A in a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely.
You know what, by the way, Peggy, this is great because a lot of the questions have come in from the audience about these topics applied. And I think what would be awesome for the audience, if you're good to sort of just step through some example use cases on the front lines of implementing these solutions, that'll, I think, open up for some the eye of the possible and also help with some of the questions that we're seeing come in from the audience. So again, as you're listening to these use cases, if you have questions, keep firing them in. We're going to answer as many as possible. So Peggy, over to you.
Sure. So this is where this segment will be talking more about industry use cases. And Jennifer will certainly chime in with her real life introspective on some of these. So in terms of the intended outcomes that Jennifer talked about, it's really about the type of data platform solution, the type of modern data architecture that I think we're all looking to achieve, does lie in the fact that, some type of AI discovery, classification, data mapping, it all needs to be inherent in the type of capabilities that everyone, all organizations should be looking for. So the first use case, and I have, I think, 4 of these industry use cases. The first one is about, building a catalog, right? The AI discovery automation piece. And this is also a big part of the CDMC framework as well, in terms of really being able to leverage machine learning to understand the capabilities, the assets, the technical, the business assets that's in your data landscape. And I think I, have a lot of conversations with folks that say, can we just write a script? And I think that was one of the early questions. Can we just write a technical script to find and identify this information and put it in my catalog, right? So I think the challenge, though, that I think you've heard Jennifer talk about is that the data is not just A to B. It's a lot of related segments of a person, of an entity that needs to be identified. And also the fact that information is stored increasingly in unstructured data sources. So being able to first discover all this, put it in a catalog, and be able to classify, understand exactly how that's used in the context of your business processes, and be able to make sure that the context of that data is used correctly. So Jennifer, I know that you've seen a lot of data catalogs. I'm sure that, and you also mentioned as well the fact that it's manual to update, which is, again, the biggest challenge that we saw in poll number 1. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah. So I think it also, I was looking at the questions, also comes into somebody who had asked about the data dictionary and it being more of an old term, and that did burn a little bit, but it is an older term, data dictionary, but it is data cataloging, right? It is the data inventory. It's understanding our data about the data. What is part of that? What is the data? What is it? What are the attributes of that data? What is the lineage of that data? And then now, most importantly, what is that classification of that data? So that now we can take that classification and build the the processes that stem off of this. So to me, it really is, I love the term like metadata catalog. I really like that. That's really what it is. At this point, it's just a portfolio of your data, right? It's definitely expanded from our old school data dictionaries and into something that is going to handle the volume that we have today.
Exactly, the volume and be able to keep it accurate, up to date at quick speeds, right? Gone are the days, and I've used data dictionaries as well, so I'm old school myself in that respect. But how do we now leverage new technologies to automatically keep catalogs up to date and accurate for our end consumer? So that's quite important. The second use case, and I'll sort of go through these, and hopefully there are additional questions from the audience that come up, is data minimization.
Peggy, do you mind just going back one? Because I was just about to pop in a question.
Sure.
This came in a moment ago from Daryl. It's a appropriate question because in the title it says AI discovery and know your data. So his question is very specific about the insights about leveraging AI to manage the subjectivity in the classification and tagging process. What does AI really mean, and what's actually sort of happening, I think, is the underlying element to what Daryl's asking. And how does this really allow companies to scale and start doing this work in volume?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at that question. So AI is a very overloaded term.
Yeah, sure.
Certainly
everything's AI.
Everything is AI. So I think more accurately, this is, how do we leverage machine learning to discover the data? So whether you're talking about structured data in tables and databases, or unstructured in a text format, email, Slack messages, how do we identify and pick out the information, the data that's in these different formats, right? So there are machine learning algorithms that can, scan through, profile the information, look through the metadata, and actually look at the content, look at the actual value itself. And these algorithms are built specifically, can be built specifically on your private sensitive data. And it's also, a lot of it has been built to be compliance for privacy and protection laws. And then also the data that's unique and bespoke to an organization. So the fact that is, you're building these algorithms to identify it, and you do it at large scale, right? And so similar to, again, the earlier question of being able to write a specific SQL statement, being able to build at such a large scale, and being able to be things like language agnostic, and being able to understand and increase the confidence score of being able to pinpoint and validate that it's a credit card number or a social security number, by also looking at surrounding data, contextual data around it. So that's where things like natural language processing really is able to support and improve the confidence level and accuracy of data, of discovering the data. And that's really been the challenge, right? I think straight direct SQL statements can only do pattern matching. And there are a lot of gaps and errors that can be found there. But also the fact that, you want to improve the accuracy, because otherwise end users will not be able to trust exactly what's in a catalog. So being able to improve that confidence score by supporting with other contextual data, and being able to do feedback loops. We call it supervised machine learning, in order to improve the accuracy and the training in the next round as well. So hopefully that answered.
No, that was great, Peggy. And to me, this idea that it's not a magic bullet, but it is a huge advantage that as you apply this, machine learning algorithms get stronger and stronger to the degree that they're handling more data, and they're going to develop more patterns and speed up the process. But also there's still a need to some degree to have humans intervene and inspect. It's not a press button, have a cup of coffee, and it's all figured out for you.
Absolutely. It's AI assisted, right? So certainly
exactly,
you don't want to rely on the first step should not be humans doing all the curation and workflows. You want to have the machine learning algorithms do the bulk of the work, and then what I call data stewards do the review and the validation. So the heavy lifting is taken away from them.
No, and this is great because there were several questions that were wonderful put in by the EDM webinar audience of where do you start? And how feasible is this and so forth. So it's painting a path that has pragmatism built in, which is great. So back to you.
Absolutely. So the second use case is certainly around data minimization. And this is a common term that we were all educated through GDPR in terms of really being able to limit the data that's collected, really knowing the purpose of why the data is collected, and then be able to only allow that relevant specific data to be collected. So this is where, again, Jennifer mentioned earlier, the hoarding issue, right? People have hoarded multiple copies of the data, similar duplications of the data. If you look at your technology teams, or I look at my SharePoint drives, how many different versions of the final document do I have? Multiple copies. And being able to deduplicate your files, being able to reduce the size of your databases, reduce the risk and security risk of potentially storing excess data. There's a really lot of benefits in terms of from a privacy, compliance, and then also from a rationalization and hygiene perspective. So I know, Jennifer, HR, certainly this data minimization plays a large part in your initiatives as well.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And like I said, when we look at we'll take for instance even our data elements across HR. As we work through just our Workday platform, we have about 3,500 data elements, and about 1,500 of those are KDEs. So when we look at the amount of information that we need just to process payroll, or we need to process 401k, it can be a lot. But again, at the end of the day, who is using it? Like, what is the fit for purpose, right? So to your point, are there, now we have, spreadsheets possibly in, our OneDrive that we're holding on to, we're replicating this information. So we may know where these, 3,500 elements are being used from a Workday perspective, but to your point, you said earlier, it's the unknowns we don't know, right? Creating, and it's almost to that maturity question earlier, how mature are you? Maturing, working on a change management organization to say and begin to have that data-driven mindset of minimization, right? Perhaps you don't need to say that on your OneDrive. Perhaps we can build something that can minimize that exposure and allow us to truly understand where the data is at a resting point, so that we can then, retain it and purge it as appropriate instead of scanning a bunch of unstructured, data sources.
Exactly. And this is, again, where we do see AI machine learning being able to help accelerate those type of decisions and make decisions on what exactly to delete. So that's actually one of my later use cases as well around retention. But this is one of my favorite use cases, and certainly in terms of sensitive data management, there is a component of privacy, right? We're talking about being able to report on the information that's tied to your as a customer or as an employee. You have a right to be able to ask for your information to be deleted. But from an organization point of view, how do you actually create that report, right? How do you actually know all the related entities, information? And as Jennifer said, there's hundreds of touch points within an organization in terms of all your related data. So it's not just yourself, but all people in your family and all the interactions you've done with an organization. That also needs to be reported on through data subject access reporting, or records of process activities. All those types of compliance reporting needs to be automated in some way, and organizations need to have a solution for reporting. I know, Jennifer, when we talked about this during our webinar prep, you had a lot of interesting stories as well, because privacy, all those privacy protection laws does have a big impact, certainly on the operations within Silicon Valley Bank.
Yeah, it does. And I encourage people to almost not think of client and employee, but more of just personal data. When we look at these laws coming in, I mean, I'm a customer in some companies, I'm an employee in other companies, and according to these laws, I'm going to be treated the same way, right? And what I can do and what I want to remove, et cetera. We have a huge focus on our consumer and our client, which I agree with, but we're just forgetting at the core of it is personal data. And so as these new laws come in, again, we only have 5 states now, but even within those 5 states, it's not a one-to-one. You know, some states have different nuances, or, you know, similar to the retention schedule, how long we should keep it, how long, you know, we have till we purge it. And so now we add in how many other states, it's just going to become massive and very hard to maintain. And so something like this, having some kind of reporting dashboard, some understanding of that is going to be critical as the United States and even globally starts to build out their data laws.
Absolutely. And last but not least, we've been mentioning retention, and again, a very manual process, right? If you look at it from a top down, organizations and different industries have specific and stringent policies on, you know, depending on the type of document it is, how long you can keep it. And, you know, I've seen organizations, you know, spend, you know, this is where they spend their manual heavy lifting, right? Being able to read through the policy, understand what the data retention policy says, and then find that document, find that information across the entire organization, and make sure that it's either purged, or if it's a legal hold, or, you know, being able to manage it effectively and efficiently, and have an audit trail to make sure that it's documented, that they've done it across. And I think, you know, when we think about structured data, it's a little bit more manageable, but again, it's the unstructured data that's where those policies and applying those business rules are important. So I know, Jennifer, you talked earlier about, you know, having to write those business rules, right? And that's gonna happen at every organization where those business rules need to be defined. But then how do you make sure that there's a scalable process for finding and automatically finding and taking action on that rule, I think is critical for the operationalization of retention programs.
Yeah, and I encourage people on the phone, especially some of the laggers, which, you know, also gave me a little heartburn, your 5% there. You know, I encourage people to start to be proactive. As you go out, start to look at your data and start to understand, you know, across your organization, or even on your laptop alone. Do you really need to do you understand first and foremost your company's retention schedule? And do you need to need to purge that data? Do you need to have it, or do you need to purge it? In addition, you know, what we're seeing as we're going across searching these unstructured sources is that we're not all really good at naming conventions. And so when you go to search for something, we're looking at, you know, something that may be, you know, compensation.doc, and then when you dig into it, there's really no compensation in there. It just has to do with, you know, maybe somebody's agreement when they were onboarded. And so the more we can get better at our naming conventions and truly holding true to what's going to be in that document, the better off companies will be when we go to implement something like this, an automated tool, as it begins to do its AI, you know, adventure across our information and bring back those results. That will also help companies set themselves up for success in the future.
Great. Jennifer, Peggy, this has been great. Thanks for Peggy sharing the use cases. We're going to take a few of the audience questions. I've been pinging them in along the way. So a few that we'll cover now, and then we'll wrap up. And as mentioned, every question that was typed in will get a written response after this event. And we're going to share both the slide deck, because we've been asked about that, and we'll send a recording link so you can share this entire presentation with colleagues in your organization or with any friends in industry. Frankly, this is a big thank you to Silicon Valley Bank and BigID for sponsoring this webinar with the EDM Council as an educational activity for everyone that's listening in. So here, one of the questions that came in from Gaithry is about this idea of leveraging obfuscation, you know, data masking and purging techniques on various data. We've sort of covered that. You know, Peggy, do you want to, and Jennifer, do you want to comment on that? Where does those capabilities and concepts play in this whole discussion topic?
Sure. I'll start first. I mean, certainly, we see a lot of requirements around the data masking when it comes to being able to share data across teams. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is, understanding the true value and the data value itself, and be able to take action on it. But I think we see the obfuscation and the masking part more so when it comes to data sharing, the data analytics teams that need to use the data. But I'm sure, Jennifer, you have other thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I have to echo your thoughts. I think, it all depends on the company's maturity scale as well, and where they are in their journey, and understanding their data at the core, right? So if we don't truly understand what needs to be masked, and who we're sharing it with, I mean, to me, first and foremost, that is the first step, right? How we do it, how we implement it, what we implement with, we can build upon. But I still go back to that, foundational, and just looking at that maturity curve. That's something that, I continue to repeat on, but I think it's something that probably resonates with a lot of people on this call, because that is the know your data, right? And then everything else can be built off of that.
So Jennifer and Peggy, another question. This is an interesting question that came in from Gita, and by the way, Jennifer, in one of your slides, you had that continuum of structured and unstructured data, and needing to really think about, sensitive data management across both universes. Usually structured data gets more attention, but there's there's consequential data embedded in many, many, many documents. So her question goes as follows: what is the best way to govern unstructured data? What is involved? And this is a nice little addition at the end. How do you measure success in doing that? So Jennifer, you've been on the front line of looking at both structured and unstructured data. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really goes down to the change management and the education. At the end of the day, we continue to say every SVB is a data steward. They may not have it in their title. We are all responsible to ensure the safety and governance over our data. And at the end of the day, we cannot control, to a certain point, what people do. But if we can get the proper governance model in, if we can continue to educate, if we have our areas like cybersecurity, we have our guardrails around our data, we will definitely be in a better place. And I've seen that maturity, that needle move at SVB, and it's actually really exciting to see when you are no longer kind of looked at as being boring talking about data, but you're jazzing people up to be part of that solving that problem and really protecting the company and its assets. And one of its most important assets is data. Yep,
exactly. Well, so we have a few minutes left, and we want to share with our audience different resources. But Peggy, you and the BigID team were kind enough to help sponsor this activity. Do you mind telling us a little more about BigID? That would be awesome.
Sure. So BigID essentially is a data platform end to end that starts with the AI discovery, being able to automatically discover, classify, understand that context, and give the additional data insights that we've been talking about, whether it's for the business use case of retention or data minimization. It all starts with a AI discovery, a bottoms up approach, right? To doing data management. And again, the benefits certainly reside around privacy and security and governance. But at a large scale, how do you really understand what actions to take? And I think that a lot of discovery actions out there take things at a very minute level. So how do you actually take action at a large scale? That's what we call clustering and correlation, and being able to understand the relationships of thousands and petabytes of data. And that's the size of the data we're talking about. So really one platform, applications that help organizations achieve these specific results and be able to leverage it across the board. And this is a really simple illustration of what I'm talking about, being able to 3 layers, right? Connect to your data, whether we're talking about structured or unstructured, pipeline, streaming data, multi-cloud solutions, connect to all your business applications, really understand the metadata and the data itself. and then be able to bring those data insights to know your data, whether it's PI data, PHI data, and be able to take specific insights on understanding similarities, duplications, and then lastly, control your data. How do you take actions? We talked about privacy reporting, we talked about data retention and remediation. Those type of actions are helping organizations control their data, and being able to do it all in one siloed, singular platform is really key in order to be able to have complete visibility and complete control of all your data assets. So welcome anyone that has any questions on these topics today, to feel free to reach out to myself or to Jennifer, and we'll be happy to talk more about data, because that's what we live and breathe in. So this is our world.
Peggy, thank you for sharing this about the organization. And Jennifer, also wanted to say thank you for coming out and letting this team know about these topics. For our audience, we've put in a few links that you might find useful. First, you've heard the reference to CDMC. It stands for the Cloud Data Management Capability Framework. And it's all about establishing a data risk control environment for cloud, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud. In fact, BigID, many companies throughout the world, including the top 3 cloud companies, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, have been involved in building this framework. You can download that control framework right now. The major cloud companies, first starting with Amazon, just announced in the marketplace, they have the CDMC controls built in. We're anticipating the other major cloud companies to be announcing shortly. So this is all useful information for you. And Peggy and Jennifer, we're going to send out to everyone, as mentioned, the slides, answers to everyone's questions, and the recording link. And we certainly encourage you, please visit the BigID website if you want to learn more about them. They're a very active and good member of the council. So I think we're near the top of the hour. Jennifer, thank you. Peggy, thank you. And for our audience, thank you for tuning in today. And we look forward. And by the way, happy Valentine's Day to everyone. Enjoy the day. And thank you for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.